Assalamualaikum and good day, everyone. My name is Kulsum Ghayas, and on behalf of the organizing committee of the Aga Khan University Sixth Sense Forum, it is my great pleasure to welcome you today. The Sixth Sense Forum organizes lectures and events because we have a firm belief that free, open, and diverse academic discourse is the cornerstone of a great institution. To date, 6SF has organized almost 60 sessions. We started back in 2009. Today is actually our 59th session. We've been covering topics as diverse as astronomy, art, political science, poetry, music, and literature by speakers both within AKU and beyond Pakistan, as you perhaps saw on the screen while waiting for the session to start. We have also had sessions under the Apna Karachi and Apna Pakistan banner, through which we attempt to bring the discussion out of the ivory tower and focus on the many problems of the country, but more importantly, solutions. We've moved to an online format during the current circumstances, and I'm very grateful for the support of our IT colleagues and others in Conference Secretariat, Public Affairs, but most importantly, the members of the 6SF Organizing Committee for making it all happen. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to bring to everyone's attention to the chat feature of this webinar. For the question and answer that will take place at the end of the talk and which our organizing committee member Azra Naseem will be so graciously hosting, please go ahead and post your questions there. She will field them and then we'll have an opportunity for the Q&A at the end of the session. It really is now my privilege to invite today's speaker, Amir Husain. Amir is a serial entrepreneur, inventor, technologist, and author. He's based out of Austin, Texas in the US. He's the founder and CEO of an award-winning artificial intelligence company called SparkCognition, and is also the founding CEO of SkyGrid, a Boeing and SparkCognition joint venture that is building an aerial operating system to power the next century of aviation. Amir's work has been featured in world-leading outlets such as Forbes, Fox Business News, and proceedings from the US Naval Institute. He's also the author of the best-selling book, The Sentient Machine, The Coming Age of Artificial Intelligence, and a co-author of the compilation Hyperwar, Conflict and Competition in the AI Century. Today, in the Sixth Sense Forum, Amir will be talking about traversing the ideascape. Amir, it's my great pleasure to hand it over to you, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Kulsum. Let me see here if I can get the sharing taken care of. Are you all able to see the slides?
Thank you, Amir. Yes, please go ahead.
Wonderful. So, good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. I want to express my gratitude to Kulsum and Azra for organizing such a wonderful gathering. And frankly, I'm delighted to be speaking at the Aga Khan University. The contributions of this great institution are many, but for me, the most important perhaps is that the AKU has served as an enduring model for excellence. Today, we'll be talking about artificial intelligence and how machines can learn by example. And so it's quite apt that the institution which is providing a platform for this discussion has itself served as an example from which others might learn. And the idea of excellence, which is a human construct, can be a goal. Excellence can be a goal. And for some, it is also a meditation. As we think within the field of artificial intelligence on how to set goals for machines, which is an outstanding research problem, we have an opportunity to think about the goals that also drive our lives. And for me, undying perseverance in the pursuit of excellence is as worthy a goal as any. So as we traverse the ideascape, the landscape of all possible ideas that yet wait to be discovered, it is our journey through the ideascape that may ultimately give our lives purpose. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my background. That was a very kind introduction, but I want to take a slightly different lens and explain to you why I have this background. I've been obsessed with the idea of artificial intelligence and computation since forever, as long as I can remember. And Of course, artificial intelligence is understood by many to be a technology, but it's not. It's not a technology, it's not a product, it's a science, and its implications are massively broad. So, as AI systems are adopted throughout the world, they extend into areas beyond technology and beyond business and into questions around ethics and policy and indeed the nature of future societies. So therefore, it's impossible to do serious practical work in this field without engaging with these many diverse communities to learn from them and also to contribute to them. So I am a computer scientist by training, and I serve on the board of UT Austin's Department of Computer Science, which is a top 10 department globally. My wife Zabe, who runs a robotics company, and I helped establish the new Machine Learning Institute at UT Austin with the NSF now collaborating with us there. We're very excited about that institution, and I think it's going to be an important center of learning for AI. I've also engaged with policy focused organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations, of which I am a member, and where I served on the AI task force chaired by Admiral McRaven. Uh, of course, my prime responsibilities are SparkCognition and SkyGrid, where we're building AI systems to change the world. But in my view, it's equally important to engage with all these other communities, lawyers, thinkers, philosophers, um, obviously academics, because the impact of AI is going to be so monumental and so huge that no one community alone should be the one deciding how this all plays out. Now, Mark Andreessen, the famous founder of Netscape and now a leading VC in Silicon Valley, many years ago said that software is eating the world. And sort of my corollary to that is that AI is now eating software. Software is eating the world in many ways, but one conception of that is that the function physical things provide is being replaced by software. Complex objects that mechanistically implement function, for example, the internal combustion engine that we all use in our vehicles, or most of us use in our vehicles, those objects are giving way to simpler electric motors that provide even more sophisticated function, but through the power of software. Their mechanical complication diminishes, their digital complication increases. And because digital complication is virtual, it exists as lines of code, it exists as programs. In this sense, software is literally eating the world by simplifying that which is physical. But there's also another way in which many fear software might eat the world and AI might eat software. Back in 2016, there were surveys conducted of leading AI researchers, and a plethora of types of jobs was given to them to judge when AI would overtake or at least achieve human level competence in the pursuit of any one of these endeavors, any one of these jobs. And what you find is that many of these assessments turned out to be actually quite conservative. I'll randomly give you a few examples. In 2019, an AI called Pluribus beat the human player who holds the record for the most world poker titles. Autonomous trucks, which are another innovation that's listed here, will take the road this year in the US with no one on board. And there's multiple companies working towards this aim. Autonomous tractors, a brilliant young company called Monarch Tractors here in the US. They build autonomous tractors with sophisticated computer vision and lane control and really optimal behaviors of many types. And this technology just continues to get better. Another one, of course, in context of the platform that we have today with the Aga Khan robotic surgery, great strides are being made here. And KUKA is a company, KUKA Medical Robotics. They are pioneering this area and investing heavily, but of course, many European manufacturers like Siemens, etc., are also involved. And telemedicine, which was accelerated by COVID, will become an accelerant for AI robotic surgery as well. The reason being that when you operate at distance over a digital connection using digital inputs and digital outputs, you capture human experience in the form of bits and bytes. And you capture the scenes, the images to which the human expert is reacting also as bits and bytes. And so training data sets begin to emanate from these telemedicine interactions and remote surgeries. So this becomes an accelerant. COVID has been an accelerant to the use of this technology, and eventually we'll see that robotic surgeries will become more and more commonplace. Now, one thing that I must mention is that for a developing nation, one of the great promises was, look, population is a problem, but educate your workforce, educate your people. If you can't give them very advanced skills, give them basic skills. And economic prosperity will then follow. In fact, you'll be able to use this talent to export. There might be jobs that don't make sense to do in other countries economically, but those jobs will come to this trained workforce. And so the population boom might become a huge dividend, might pay a huge dividend. And that demographic dividend, whether or not it happens, is now a question really of speed, because there is a counter current in the world. And that counter current is the rapidly ascending capability that is powered by AI, a capability of automation across many fields. And ultimately, for the types of labor that we talk about in terms of people benefiting from the demographic dividend, those types of labor can be automated. So what happens to developing countries in this context? I've been involved with startups all my life, and when you're building a company from scratch, in the case of SparkCognition now, it's a sizable company, but there was a day when there was just one person, an idea, and a little bit of code. So when you do that journey repeatedly, one of the things that you realize is that there are predators of all sizes in the ecosystem. And the best strategy that I've found is just to run faster. So you can stop and complain. You can stop and try to figure out how you can undermine the environment. But in the end, perhaps the best strategy is just to move faster. And of course, evolution discovered this too. But in the context of this conversation and developing countries and this threat of artificial intelligence potentially undermining any demographic dividends, given the data that you see here on screen, one of the thoughts that I have is how does one create faster capabilities to spur learning and inculcate more and more advanced learning, but really speed up the process? Because by the time enough is done, it might be, a dollar short and a day late. Now, artificial intelligence has, of course, also raised the specter of existential fears. Vladimir Putin is very famous for having said that he who controls artificial intelligence will rule the world. Elon Musk has expressed his fears around artificial intelligence. And of course, the late, great Stephen Hawking had done the same thing. My view, of course, is that while it's incredibly important to listen and to understand where these fears are coming from, these fears fall in two categories. One, artificial intelligence will become so sophisticated and out of control that it will kill us all. And secondly, that it'll take away our jobs. We spoke about jobs a little bit, but as far as artificial intelligence becoming sentient and completely going out of control, no one who seriously pursues artificial intelligence research will tell you that that is imminent. There is plenty of time. If that's a possibility, it's many years away. However, highly autonomous systems controlled by malevolent people, malevolent humans, malevolent men, can wreak havoc in the world. And with this recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, you saw the prelude, the swarms, the autonomous drones, large scale deployment of highly intelligent systems on the field of battle. All of these are coming. They won't be sentient, they won't have their own goals. But when through history have we ever required anything external to supply our societies with malevolence? We seem to come up with enough internally. That to me is a greater challenge than worrying about the malevolence of AI. So, um, on to happier topics though, while these fears exist in the backdrop, the reality is that technology is inevitable. If you consider your purpose to be the accumulation of knowledge and the pursuit of undiscovered ideas, and within those ideas exists technology, then in that sense technology is inevitable. If Einstein had not discovered what he discovered, would it have taken another decade or 2 decades or 3 decades before humanity as a whole would have made that discovery? Was fire discovered by one human being? Not really. There were probably spontaneous discoveries all over human settlements, amongst the ancients. So there are uh, there's a way to think about technology as inevitable, and therefore the focus then shifts not on what can you stop. Can I ban YouTube? Can I ban Facebook? Can I stop? Can I impede? The question, I think, is how do you direct technology to a higher purpose? And both the malevolent engagement with technology and the aspirational engagement with technology are a function not so much of the technology, but a function of the wielder of that technology. And for now, that wielder is us. So when you put technology to good use, artificial intelligence in particular, AI-based assistance in particularly in service of the care of the elderly, these are coming about. You've got autonomous transportation, the company that I'm CEO of, which is a joint venture with Boeing. SkyGrid is building the software underpinnings to create the future of aviation. We imagine a future where it's not thousands of manned aircraft flying through the sky, but millions of autonomous systems of all shapes and sizes, carrying out all sorts of missions flying through the sky, where cybersecurity is dealt with autonomously, where maintenance is performed autonomously, where problems are predicted with predictive maintenance technologies well in advance of their occurrence, where routes are approved automatically. In the US, the FAA, which is the regulatory authority governing flight, they have now implemented a system called Lance, which provides essentially an API, a server, if you will, that resides at the FAA. And when you construct a flight path for an autonomous drone or an unmanned system, you can electronically submit this and receive their approval. And this has created the basis for automated systems that can automatically provide safe routes through the air for large numbers of autonomous drones to take to the skies and fulfill missions. So whether it's cognitive manufacturing, here is an example of the Maker Arm robot, which can use lasers to engrave, it can 3D print, it can cut materials, it can be a robotic gripper arm can be attached to it, and multiple instances of these robots can also collaborate. So artificial intelligence combined with systems, machines that take many different shapes. They fly in the sky, they're a robot on your table, they are a robot coming into your room to help you if you are in need of help in a hospital bed. They will take all sorts of shapes and perform all sorts of functions. Now, the question, of course, is when we say machines think, what do we mean? Um, this is a very deep question. And while I can give you some contours of things to think about and look at, I don't think anyone has conclusively been able to answer this question because there are so many subjective concepts that are unique to human understanding and human history that pervade this question and all of the various answers that people have provided. But there are, within artificial intelligence, there are roughly three schools of thought and three technologies, three families of algorithms. One in the early advent, the Genesis AI, if you will, was around John McCarthy and Marvin Minsky, the fathers of AI, thinking that logic was the key, that they could encode statements of logic and then use the techniques of deduction and induction and much of the same technology that was developed in ancient Greece, but to complement that with common sense, to complement that with databases of facts, also written as predicate logic, as statements of logic that could all interoperate. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Given those two facts, logic dictates that Socrates is mortal. That being a simple example, but you can think of millions of such rules all interacting together. Um, a person has returned from the swimming pool after a swim. You can imply that he is likely wet because the swimming pool has water. And when people interact with water physically, they get wet, and on and on and on. So that was one approach. It fell out of favor because large knowledge bases of these rules and the encoding of facts manually turned out to be a very, very tedious endeavor. Artificial neural networks seek inspiration from the human brain. They have concepts like neurons, and they have connections like synapses, and they have weights which determine when a neuron fires, for example. So they're biologically inspired, but by no means a copy of the brain. And this is the area which is the progenitor of what is now called deep learning, the area that is most successful in terms of image recognition and many of these other technologies. And then, of course, genetic algorithms, again, a biologically inspired phenomena where the idea is that algorithms can perform an evolutionary search of some type, that they can encode desirable traits in what they are looking for, and that they can create a random sample or a population which is quite large, and then exchange these traits as if by reproduction and introduce, such as by mutation, random changes as generations of these objects or these solutions progress. So with genetic algorithms, we made discoveries, and genetic algorithms were able to make discoveries in, for example, electrical engineering, leading to the filing of patents, which it was inconceivable that a machine would think and would come up with an idea that no human being had had, that that idea would be commercially interesting and useful, and that that machine would gain a patent. But now it's gone far beyond this, of course. You see machines painting, you see a recent piece of AI art that was auctioned for almost £500,000. And you'll see much more of this in future. You'll see songs composed by AIs that will be in the top 40. Your pop charts, the Billboard charts, etc. There'll be popular songs, there'll be beautiful paintings that we will subjectively connect with, but will be the outcome of an AI algorithm. I write poetry, and I've also, over the last several years, been working on various programs that help me generate poetry. So I collaborate with AI systems to write poems. I've published a few of those, and I'm building a collection over time. And I'll tell you from personal experience that my ability to generate new ideas, even in the subjective context of poetry, is tremendously amplified in my collaboration with these artificial constructs. I said that deep learning is today one of the most popular schemes being used, popular techniques being used. And so the way that this works is that essentially you construct what looks like a very simplified brain, neurons taking, inputs, axons, dendrites, synapses, and it's a structure that's very simplified compared to a human brain, but it's sort of a graph computational structure. Things are connected and math happens within each neuron to determine how weights get transmitted, how signals get transmitted to the next layer. And deep learning is simply that structure, but done deep, many layers of these neurons connected with each other. This is the area which has yielded breakthroughs in image recognition, handwriting recognition. And the way they learn is by example. You provide huge numbers of pictures of dogs, huge numbers of pictures of cats, and you provide a label. This is a dog, this is a cat. The network is told whether it guessed right or wrong. It corrects itself constantly. And then as it corrects itself, the weights within the network, the propensity for any one neuron to fire is tuned precisely to the training data. But then the amazing thing, of course, is that you can then supply a picture that this network had never seen a picture of a dog, and it'll classify it correctly. So these neural networks have given us perception, and that perception is what is enabling, for example, self-driving cars, facial recognition and security applications, and much more. But it's not the only way in which artificial intelligence is being implemented. Now, think about an AI game player, because that's another topic that's been in the news a lot. AI programs beating the world's Go champion, or of course, many years prior, the chess grandmasters. But let's think about how that happens. Now, this is not deep learning. This is a different approach. This is thinking by generating and pruning. So one of the things with chess, if say you're in your 30s or 40s, and if you learned chess as a child, I'm sure whoever was teaching you told you that, look, the key here is to think ahead, think so many moves ahead. But even the greatest human players can't think too many moves ahead. The reason being that the possibilities explode with every additional set of moves that you consider. And in chess, that's a problem, that's a big problem for computers. But in other games, like let's say tic-tac-toe, it's something that I can show on one slide. So you start off with an empty board on the left, and then there are a couple of moves. From each one of those moves, there are some counter moves, and then there are moves after that. So essentially what the computer is doing here, what this algorithm is doing here, is it's searching through time before that time has arrived. And it is because this world is deterministic, this world of tic-tac-toe is deterministic. It's basically identifying all possibilities and then navigating its way through this maze of ideas to the end where it wins. And from there, it's simply working back and playing to you the set of moves that will cause a victory for it and a defeat for you. And again, the reason I'm using tic-tac-toe is because it's simple. It's something that can be shown in a picture, but you can imagine anything like this. You can imagine, classical military decisions. You can imagine economic decisions. You can imagine resource allocation decisions. As long as you have a way of evaluating the state of your game board whether you're doing well or whether you're doing poorly, and what that score might be, you have what's known as a heuristic, an estimate, a subjective estimate of where you are in this process. And then you combine search methodologies, which in this case, search is you first generate all the possibilities, and then you prune that or cut away that which is not useful, arriving to the answer that you want. There's a lot more to say about this, but all I can do here in this short period is to seed ideas and leave you to investigate those which you found to be useful or perhaps even profound. Um, of course, ideas can be generated in many ways. And the simplest example is what is known as monkeys on typewriters. Imagine a room full of monkeys with typewriters, and given enough time, will they randomly produce War and Peace? Will they randomly produce Shakespeare? Who knows? Mathematically, probabilistically, they will. The question is, it will take a lot of time. So we know that randomness can be a great aid, but randomness causes an explosion in possibilities, which leads to massive loss of time. How can we constrain that randomness to things that matter most to us? And within that constrained space, use the randomness to chance upon things that we would not have thought of. And this is deep insight into how AIs can think. We learn by association. Things that we do next are tied to what we did last. Our brains run on an associative memory. We don't really have this notion of an entirely random uh, appraisal of all possibilities, but AIs will allow us to do that. And in that, they are able to come up with amazing things that nobody had thought about. Now, we've applied this practically. So far, we've been talking a little philosophy, we've been talking a little history of AI, a few techniques, but we build these systems and deploy them in the real world. A couple of areas where we've seen tremendous applicability. One, a product called Deep Armor that we built, which is the world's first AI that can actually do detailed examination of program binaries. So programs that you execute on your computer, documents that you get on your computer, without knowing anything about the program, without having a list of bad or good, files, it can decompile, analyze, and just like a human expert would, and tell you whether this is good or bad. So it consistently is at the top of the charts for cybersecurity. Recently, we partnered with Siemens to start to implement this in industrial environments. And then, of course, in aviation, this is an actual capture from a simulator. On the right, you have conventional, on the left, you have conventional autopilot. And on the right, you have AI pilot, which was developed by us. The plane is hurtling down a runway, it's building up speed, and suddenly one of the engines, the left engine, is about to fail. And when that happens, the pilot has a split second to decide whether to abort the takeoff, reject the takeoff, or to continue to fly. What you see here is that autopilot, rules-based pilots can't deal with the scenario, and the plane on the left is doing quite badly. The plane on the right, the stick is being jostled aggressively, pedals are being put into motion by hook or by crook. The AI is trying to figure out how to save the situation, and it does. And unfortunately, there's a sad end for this model aircraft on the left. But the point here is that this artificial intelligence system that we built at SparkCognition is powered by a technique called reinforcement learning, where it was exposed to thousands and thousands of virtual airports, because now we have virtual maps, we can get the lay of the land, the exact environmental conditions, patterns of weather, the density of the air, all of these factors that are unique to these different airfields were incorporated, and ultimately tens of thousands of takeoffs were provided in a virtual environment to this AI pilot before the AI pilot was asked to do anything. Now, how many pilots exist in the world that have taken a commercial airliner and flown with it 1 million times? None. but with an AI, you can do that. And so that's another aspect here, which very few people realize, that not only is improvement in AI systems continuous, but their experiences are also far greater than any one human will be able to accumulate. So, in many jobs and in many situations, it just becomes the obvious thing to use them. Now, there are challenges because earlier I spoke to you about dogs and cats and providing large numbers of examples to a neural network to classify. There are certain things that happen in the world, tragedies, that thankfully don't happen too frequently. So when you go in and you say, tell me when a wind turbine will blow out, or when, God forbid, a plane will crash, or when an oil rig will blow up, you just don't have hundreds of thousands of examples of disastrous events of that nature. So one challenge is, what do you do when there's not enough data? And there's many solutions to this problem. We work on some of them, but this is something to acknowledge. Another issue is, okay, where do we go from here? This seems quite human controlled, but we said machines can think. And what does that mean? Do machines think in the way that we think? I don't know, because I don't know how I think. I do know that there are certain things happening in our brain. For example, there's sort of an active voice in the foreground, and then there's a voice in the background. You can sort of observe what you are doing. What that tells me is that the human brain creates a model of me, the person, and then there is that person is the actor, and then there is a critic in the background, another intelligence that lives in the same brain that comments on the actions of the actor, which is what you do when you self-reflect. What else are you doing? And you can perhaps do this for multiple such abstract objects, because you can also create models of other people in your life and infer and imply their behavior. So you must be doing some of this modeling. But there's another thing that we do, which is that we have intrinsic motivation. We have the ability to set goals. And while these goals are constrained by society, what we've heard of, what we've learned of, conceptually, we can set any goal that we want for ourselves. So the brain is at least a system that can take on, any goal. So one of the prerequisites of machines taking on true agency is when machines also can be imbued with intrinsic motivation. So what does this mean? And one of the reasons why I think about this topic quite a bit is because it's not quite clear whether purpose is itself an emergent construct. At a certain level of cognitive sophistication, purpose just manifests. Um, so again, a much deeper discussion than unfortunately we can do now, but something to look into. One of the things that fascinates me over the last few years, we've been sort of experimenting with this idea, is correlations being leveraged to create a symbolic reasoning system in the context of, let's say, a human baby. So when you're born, you're a 0-day human baby model. What really is happening is that you kind of see your world as a diffuse pattern of light, and you have certain experiences, which is primarily hunger, high, medium, low. There's a stimulus. You might be seeing your mother, but this is how you see her, as a blurred set of black and white pixels. And so as those pixels come together, you form some idea of this being one object, and you ascribe a symbol to this collection of pixels, and it becomes symbolic in your mind. This is a symbol now. And then parts of her body that move independently, perhaps she is feeding you now with this bottle of milk. You notice that when that happens, when you observe these objects coming at you at the same time, A and B, then your hunger level begins to dissipate on the left here. And perhaps your only action, which is to flail and cry, that subsides. So you can see with this very simplistic example that with limited processing, with no context, just with a blurred field of pixels and some movement, one internal drive of hunger, let's say, and one action of flailing and crying. That, when it's combined with this very basic learning, there's something going on there too. And what I would tell you is that many babies, if you train them to respond to their mother's voice, which happens automatically, and let's say the mother is walking into a room with a bottle of milk, just that is sometimes enough to soothe them. They don't actually have to start consuming the milk, because what are they doing? They are predicting the future. They are seeing a correlation of events: the presence of the mother, an object they recognize; the presence of a bottle of milk, an object that they recognize. And based on their past experience, they are in many ways, Bayesians. They take their past experience, their priors, and they project them onto the future. And so they feel that, expending that extra energy perhaps is of no point now, because in the near term future they will get what they needed. So a very basic idea here, but you can see that, a software developer, a data scientist, and an AI practitioner would find nothing unimplementable in what I've just walked you through. As you build this into greater levels of sophistication, and as the set of objects becomes larger and the nature of their relationships becomes more complex, then you start to get into modeling human behavior, which of course is quite difficult to do. So with that, I suppose I am out of time, maybe even a couple of minutes over. If you do find this interesting, if you found any of these topics interesting, there are a number of resources that you can look at. I run a website where I recommend books. There's plenty of videos to watch. Then also SparkCognition, which all the products that we spoke about here, you can find information about them. And the books are all on Amazon. There's plenty on YouTube. Anyhow, lots to engage with if any of this was interesting to you. So with that, let me conclude, and thank you all for your patience in listening to this presentation.
Thank you, Amir, for a really stimulated talk. And we have a number of questions. So I'm going to go through some of these questions, and I'll try to take as many questions as we can in the amount of time that is left. So let me begin with a question related to healthcare. So Amir, in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned AI is eating software. And what we've seen in the healthcare, the use of software for health delivery and health monitoring is still kind of growing. And so the question is that what do you see as the main barriers of using AI in healthcare?
I think there's two barriers. One is data, and how do we gather more effective data? The second is obviously ethics and regulation. So let me give you an example. I've suffered from cluster headaches since the age of 18. Now, not many people hear the word headaches and they say, okay, well, headache, bad headache. Cluster headaches are about the most painful thing you can experience and live through. They maximize your pain response to the point where you often collapse, faint. And so I've been dealing with this since the age of 18. Now, I was misdiagnosed over and over and over and over, until one day I had a really, really bad attack here in Austin, and I collapsed. I was taken to the hospital. The next thing, when I woke up in the morning, I had a very kind neuro who I just chanced upon, and fate was kind. He had just read a research paper a day ago that talked about an absolutely new therapy to try and arrest these. There's no cure, but to try and arrest these. I've been on that therapy now for years, but the point is, had I not met that person, and had he not read this one paper in a body of knowledge in the medical community, which is now so vast and moves at such velocity that no one doctor can keep up with these things, then I would have continued to suffer to the extent that I was prior. And now I still do, but it's much better. It's under control. So I think the lack of data, and even now we don't know what triggers this. So one of the experiments that I think of myself as a science experiment, and one of the things that I try to do is I try to capture all sorts of data about me, and I try and build models around that to predict why this is happening to me, because there is no definitive answer as far as medicine goes right now. So as a data scientist, can I at least avoid some of these things? So the lack of data prevents us from using AI effectively to deal with many diseases. The other aspects are, is it right? There are many things we can do that don't even have to do with AI really. There are many things that we can do. And this fusion of AI in perception and CRISPR as an actor and as a change agent, this to me is going to be one of the biggest evolutionary accelerants for humankind. The question is, when will we get over the ethics of it? In 5, 10, 15, 20, or 50 years? Because, like I said, technology is inevitable. So something that can happen will happen. And the response frameworks to that then become not ethical, but game theoretic. When you have a nuclear weapon and you have an enmity with someone that has a nuclear weapon, if they at all have the ability to acquire a nuclear weapon, they will. Why? Not because nuclear weapons are good, but because now you are in a game theoretic construct. So when technology starts to deliver massive benefit, it cannot be ignored. Why? Because humans don't share benefit equitably. They never have throughout history. And the collective human experience is to attain equity through effort. If you don't do that, then you end up being the sad chapters in history, and those that can end up writing those chapters.
Thank you, Amir. This has triggered some more questions that have come up, and just building on what you've talked about, the ethics, and so how what structures can we build to stop AI from becoming a sophisticated killing machines, or stop the use of AI in the militaries around the world. So
I
what
mean,
ethical frameworks do you think are needed?
many years ago, I worked with General John Allen, who was a four-star Marine general and a very good close friend of mine. We worked on this concept called hyperwar, which was analyzing the impact of AI in the field of battle. We wrote a book about it. The various different academic defense publications in the US have published versions of that piece. The idea here isn't to build better killing machines. The idea here is to be realistic. And I think when you are working in artificial intelligence, particularly artificial intelligence and physical systems, if you say, look, here's all the technology, and now somebody else can go do what they want to do with it, and you know what those things will be, but you feel, you're high and mighty, ethically, you're sitting on your high horse, and you wash your hands of it. To me, that is as much enablement as being the one that wants the thing built to begin with. So what's the middle ground? If you philosophically believe at a deep level that there is a set of constraints around us, that set of constraints is human nature. In history, it doesn't matter who was Muslim or Christian or Buddhist, or who was from the East or who was from the West. Generally, you find bad behavior driven by large populations being spurred on in environments that are environments of scarcity. When scarcity hits humanity, the worst comes out of it. Now, there's always individual outliers. I'm not talking about the greats of history, the great sages, the great prophet, the great philanthropists. I'm talking about humanity as a mass. And the reality is that that is the constraint. Human nature is a constraint. So acting within that constraint in a practical way says that weapons, we are not post-human yet. We have not yet achieved a point in our evolution where we feel so safe at home that we feel that we can unilaterally disarm and everyone around us will just be kind to us. Okay? No country can do that. No society can thrive doing that. There are one or two examples. People say, well, there's this wonderful country in the middle of Europe, hasn't it worked out for them? Please read the history of that country in detail to know what other bargaining chips in their game theoretic environment they've employed to reach that stage. So this is not about any one country. It's not even about any one race or religion or group of people. I am talking about things at the level of human nature and the dynamics within large groups of people. One example of those dynamics is international relations.
Okay, so Amir, again, there are a number of questions which are related to issues in the developing world. So I'll just pick up one question, which I think is very interesting. So poverty, as you know, is a big problem in the developing world. Do we know of any examples where AI has been used to directly alleviate poverty?
Oh, look, absolutely. In South Africa, there are massive failures of power which lead to more poverty, right? Because you can't produce, you can't employ people, factories go down. In Pakistan, there have been similar experiences in past years. In South Africa, one of the reasons is the failure of crews to maintain some of those power plants. Artificial intelligence is being used, predictive maintenance, and we've deployed predictive maintenance to essentially predict failures with large turbines before they happen, right? In Pakistan, let me give you an example. We talk about the fact that we're going to run out of fresh water. We're going to run out of fresh water because, and my numbers might be off by a little, but they're not off by much. About 60 to 70% of our fresh water is used for flood irrigation. Flood irrigation is incredibly inefficient. And the replacement or the alternative to flood irrigation is drip irrigation, very controlled delivery of nutrients just where you need them and no wastage. Now, if you were to move from flood to drip irrigation, some estimates suggest that between 40 and 60% of the water expended on flood irrigation could be saved. All that the government of Pakistan has to do in order to solve the freshwater problem or the running out of fresh water is to say, okay, here is an incentive. We are going to take agriculture across the country. We're going to provide sensors, basic controllers that use very basic AI. And that will make up for the skills gap because unskilled farmers won't know how to operate this equipment to begin with. So the decisions will be made by these controllers. And we're going to do automated AI-powered drip irrigation through the country. Your output will increase. Your skills gap will not impede, such as in the case of South Africa, and your fresh water will be preserved. So again, I'm giving you one small example. You go through and you look at grid. We lose so much electricity in Pakistan because of inefficiencies relative to the grid. Where exactly? Can you predict what's going to happen next? Can you predict grid failures? Can you predict failures of power plants? Of course you can, because all of this is being done. What is poverty? The poverty is two things, right? One is inadequate distribution of resources. And secondly, it is scarcity. Both of these things, artificial intelligence can help in a more equitable distribution of resources, and artificial intelligence can help in the enhanced production of the very basic things that can reduce scarcity, if not eliminate it entirely.
Okay, thank you, Amir. So now that you've given an example that we can actually relate to in Pakistan, so I'm going to ask my one last question because we have almost reached the end of our session. And this question, it's actually a bunch of questions that I will, so what, so I think people would like to know what are your plans of extending your work in Pakistan, or are you thinking about working with the government, or are you thinking about involving Pakistanis in the work that you're doing? In Pakistan, for example, there's National Center of Artificial Intelligence, which I think was established in 2018. The government approved it. So there are all of these different initiatives that are taking place in Pakistan. Do you have any plans of collaborating with people in Pakistan?
Well, we work with brilliant people from all over the world, and Pakistan is home to many brilliant people. So throughout my career, I've worked with Pakistanis, and I found the collaborations between our Pakistani colleagues and colleagues from all over the world to be incredibly fruitful. As it pertains to SparkCognition in Pakistan, commercially, there are a couple of discussions with some of the largest industrial groups in the country as to how we can introduce some of this technology in Pakistan. Um, Collaboration with the government is an entirely different, topic, and it's a topic which one has to be direct about these things. I think the the impetus has to come from the government, because the government has to build trust with foreign companies. The government has to build trust and show that the types of things that have happened in the past are behind us. And it's not about words and one or two um, events. Life is short, and we have to do the best we can to benefit the largest number of people that we can. That's, in my view, it's a responsibility. So if I know that that a key player is uninterested or not motivated, let's just say, to be the change agent, uh, you know, maybe there are other environments where people are motivated, and there are change agents. So, in Islamic history, there's this interesting story that apparently one day the Prophet said he was disappointed in how people were reacting to the message. And he was told, look, your job is to be the messenger, not to force change. And at the end of the day, the best we can be is messengers. Here I am, I'm available, I have good things to share with everyone, with people in Pakistan, with people everywhere. And I have a short, brief life, and I'd like to do the most good I can in my life. So who am I to force people to change? If I can even be a messenger, or maybe provide an example or two of change, of technological change, then that to me is all I can do, and perhaps even far above my pay grade, if you will. So yeah, it's unfortunately I wish I could have given you just a very simple yes or no answer, but because it hurts me. You saw a little bit of the emotion come out there. I wish things were different, and I wish it was much easier.
Amir, so thank you. And I think many of us can understand your feelings right now, but thank you very much for this talk. I certainly enjoyed it. And with looking at the number of questions that we've received, I can see that our participants have also enjoyed it. And you're absolutely right. Now that we know your work, those of us who work in this area, or those who are interested in extending our professional work in with through machine learning, AI, will be able to get in touch with you. So thank you for that. And I'm going to now hand over the microphone to the chair of Sixth Sense Forum, Dr. Kulsum Gayas.
One last thing that I'll say, Azra, with your permission and with Kulsum's permission, is that I will help in any way I can Al Khan University, particularly in your medical pursuits. Any way that I can be helpful there, I would love to do that.
Amir, thank you so much on ending on such a positive note, but really for the message that you've shared with us. It was a broad-ranging discussion, but your presentation was so thought-provoking, so stimulating. As Azra pointed out, there were so many questions. We're very grateful for you to take out the time to communicate with us, and we look forward to perhaps engaging in the future as well. Thank you so much, Amir, on behalf of all of us.